Welcome to this time of sharing as we look at two scriptures, Psalm 36, a portion of that, and the Gospel of John, chapter 2, verse 1 through 11. How often do we fret over having enough or having things just right? It never fails that when I know, or at least when I used to know, when I had family coming to visit or friends coming, I'd find myself running around trying to get everything perfect. Sometimes even doing big projects because I wanted them to see what things we had done. I used to exhaust myself before anyone even arrived, finalizing the details as they were driving up the driveway. And then visiting with them, I'd be exhausted. Although I'll say that I don't do that nearly the way I used to in the past, and perhaps it was the ringing of my mother's words in my ear, wisdom comes with age. And maybe I just finally got wise enough to know that hopefully those that were coming to visit to me and not scope out how my house looked. Even still, we worry about abundance, don't we? Do we have enough in our bank accounts to pay the bills, to put food on the table, to help out our children, our grandchildren? Will we have enough? Are we good enough? Our reading from the Gospel of John that Bill shared with us is about abundance, though it starts with scarcity. Mary and Jesus and the disciples had been invited to a wedding when Mary notices that they've run out of wine. It would be more than an embarrassment, and she knew that, and so she knew how to fix it. She went over to Jesus and she asked him to set it right, to address the scarcity in that moment. And I love the dialogue that follows between them, mother and son. Jesus basically says, now is not the time for me to reveal who I am. But Mary passes right over his response and tells the servants to do whatever he tells them to do. Perhaps it was a mother's way of, I hear you, but you still need to do it anyway. Or was it that Mary knew in her heart that Jesus would turn this scarcity around into abundance, as he was destined to do with his entire life? Of course he does, and goes beyond in creating an exceptional wine that without a doubt all noticed. The significance of the steward's words to the bridegroom are not meant to be overlooked. He says everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk, but you have kept the good wine until now. The symbolism is clear, that Jesus brings a new day, a reversal of expectations. He is the good wine, the exceptional wine that satisfies life with abundance. This story invites us to consider what abundance looks like in our lives today. What is our measure of scarcity and abundance? For many of us, scarcity is not a matter of food, water, shelter, the basic life essentials. Our scarcity is seldom a critical concern, but more discomfort because of inconveniences in our lives that we might be threatened. Our abundance is generally measured by what is in our bank accounts, though. Our retirement funds, our material assets. Surely these past 2 years of the pandemic have challenged our sense of not enough and uncertainty in ways we hadn't really considered before, though the essentials of our lives, our day-to-day needs are generally pretty well set. Most of us listening today have enough. We're doing okay even if we wish we could do more or had more. Mary's concern over a lack of the wine at the wedding may seem awfully frivolous until we understand it in the light of greater scarcities that affect our lives, ours and others. As Mary takes notice, we too are drawn by faith and by the reality of our interconnectedness to be concerned about the lack of abundance, the scarcity that touches the lives of one another locally and throughout the world. Sally McFagg, in her book, Life Abundant, Rethinking Theology and Economy for a Planet in Peril, makes a case for a theology of a different kind of good life. The Christian good life, she says, is marked by sustainability, self-limitation, and inclusion of all, especially the weak and vulnerable. We are called to consider an abundant life and a relationship to our faith that sees the act of Jesus on behalf of humankind as not something to receive and then sit back satisfied, but rather from which we are motivated to act in the world on behalf of those in need. The abundance we are privileged to have requires something of us, and that something is to act toward a greater balance everywhere. Reverend Ann Sutherland Howard acknowledges that this is critical stuff. She says, living a faith-filled life is not about easing into a comfortable relationship with a benign God. It's not about a private peace or a personal path to enlightenment, but it is about the critical connection between the personal and the political. This life means that we live out the love of God in every choice we make. Choices about food, and about clothes, and about cars, and about recreation, and water, and heat, and light. She adds, these choices are about numbers. They are economic. They are also spiritual. It is God's intention, as we see in the life of Jesus, the one who turned water into wine, the one who sat down to the table with all the wrong people. It is God's intention that all of life should flourish. And so our task is to tend to this flourishing in the place that God dwells. That is our earth, our world. This message cannot be more fitting as we recognize Martin Luther King Jr., his message, his life, his contributions that brought necessary change then and remain reminders of all the work that still needs to be done. His dream is not complete. There is much to be done still. The torch has been passed on to us as the message of extravagant love that Jesus taught and demonstrated has been passed on to us. Extravagant love that exceeds all expectations, as the water Jesus changed not just into a mediocre wine, but into the best wine. And as his life pointed to an abundance of a different kind, the simple abundance of enough that makes possible abundance for all. Hear these words again of gratitude that are expressed in our psalm reading this morning. How precious is your steadfast love, O God. All people may take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. With you is the fountain of life. In your light we see light. What glorious words of praise. What wonderful words of affirmation. What a great declaration of gratitude. May we find in these words our own expressions of thankfulness for the extravagant blessings that we have known, and may we understand that the light of God that allows us to see the light of which the psalmist references is the awareness of our own role in sharing the extravagance and abundance of love that defines God's created order. It is out of that extravagance that Jesus, in Reverend Howard's words, allowed him to pose an alternative to the status quo of his day. It was out of that extravagance, you see, he demonstrated that everyone is somebody, everyone matters, that all are invited to the table to feast on the abundance that is available to all. It is out of that extravagance that Jesus taught a different approach to abundance and blessing and wholeness, that love unifies, that compassion brings solidarity, that in giving we receive more than enough. Mark Twain said it well when he spoke the following: if you want love and abundance in your life, give it away. The reality is that simple abundance, our attitude of enough, an abundance that cares about others, that reaches beyond self, discovers an extravagance of peace and harmony, beyond our wildest imaginations, and yet exactly what our world needs. It is what allowed the satisfaction of all in another passage we might recall, when feeding 5,000 plus gathered around Jesus were fed abundantly out of a few fish and loaves of bread. Simple abundance is more than enough to change the world, to change us. Blessings and amen.